Our world basically runs on an empire of silicon. And when you think of that empire, one name pretty much owns the conversation: TSMC. They're the top dog, no question. But what if I told you the most fascinating story isn't about the king, but about his forgotten older brother? A company that fell from grace, got caught up in a massive scandal, and then staged one of the most unbelievable comebacks in the history of tech. This is the story of UMC.
And this is where it all came crashing down. In 2018, the United States government drops this bombshell indictment on Taiwan's United Microelectronics Corporation, or UMC. We're talking about a scandal so big it could have completely wiped the company off the map.
So, the big question is, how on earth did this happen? How did the original pioneer, the first ever chip champion of Taiwan, end up pleading guilty in a US federal court? Well, to figure that out, we've got to rewind the clock.
Right. Let's go back to the very beginning. We need to see how UMC started out as the national champion, only to get completely outplayed and left in the dust by a revolutionary newcomer.
You see, UMC was the firstborn. Founded back in 1980, it was supposed to be the one, Taiwan's great hope. It was even the first chip company on their stock exchange. But then, in 1987, this guy named Morris Chang comes along and starts TSMC with a totally radical new idea. And by 1995, UMC wasn't leading anymore. It was scrambling, forced to copy its rival's strategy just to stay alive.
So what was the big difference? Well, it all came down to their business models. UMC started out as what's called an IDM, kind of like Intel. They designed and built their own chips. But TSMC, they were a pure-play foundry. They didn't design a single thing. They were just a factory for hire. A brilliant model that opened the doors for this explosion of new fabless companies, like NVIDIA, who had amazing designs, but no way to build them.
And the result of those two different paths? Well, it was staggering. By the mid-2010s, TSMC was outspending UMC 5-to-1 on research and development. That's not just a gap, that's a canyon. The firstborn, UMC, had been completely and utterly left behind.
So, you've lost the innovation race. What do? Well, UMC was faced with a choice. And instead of accepting its new reality, it decided to take a dangerous, illegal shortcut to try and get back in the game. A shortcut that would lead it straight to that criminal indictment.
Now the story shifts over to China. They were desperate to build their own chip industry and break their reliance on the West, especially for a critical component called DRAM memory. So Beijing sets up this state-owned company, Fujian Jinhua, throws billions at it to build a factory. But here's the problem. A factory is just a building if you don't have the recipe to make the chips. And that's where a very desperate UMC saw an opportunity. They agreed to develop that recipe for them.
But this wasn't some legitimate partnership, it was a straight-up heist. First, UMC poached top engineers from America's biggest memory maker, Micron. Then, before they left, those engineers downloaded over 900 of Micron's most secret files. We're talking the crown jewels, the entire blueprint. Then, back at UMC, they worked on the stolen data using laptops that weren't connected to the network, all to cover their tracks.
And the scale of this theft was just mind-boggling. U.S. prosecutors later estimated the value of what was stolen at up to $8.75 billion. It was the ultimate act of desperation. If you can't win by innovating, you cheat.
Well, when you're up against the full power of the US government, the writing's on the wall. UMC made a calculated business decision. It cut its losses. In October 2020, the company pleaded guilty, paid a $60 million fine, and agreed to cooperate. It was a humiliating end to a dark chapter, but, crazily enough, it was also the beginning of their reinvention.
Right as this whole criminal mess was collapsing, UMC's leaders made one of the most brilliant, counterintuitive moves I have ever seen in business. They decided to retreat, to publicly surrender, and it turned out to be an act of pure genius.
Okay, so it's really important to understand what they retreated to. UMC completely abandoned the race for the fastest, most advanced chips, the supermodels of the silicon world that go into iPhones and AI data centers. Instead, they decided to focus on what we call mature nodes. Think of these as the workhorses. They're the less glamorous, but absolutely essential chips that are in your car, your TV, your Wi-Fi router, literally everything. And they are made in unbelievable volumes.
This was just a masterclass in strategy. UMC knew it couldn't win a fight against TSMC, so it just decided not to fight at all. It basically said, you can have the glamorous high-end market, we're going to become the undisputed kings of this other massive, profitable market that everyone else is ignoring. They turned to their biggest weakness, not enough money for R&D, into their greatest strength, absolute focus.
And the results? They speak for themselves. Once they were free from that insanely expensive race to the cutting edge, UMC became a cash machine. At the height of the global chip shortage, demand for their workhorse chips went through the roof and profits exploded. I mean, look at this. From the depths of the scandal in 2018, their net income skyrocketed, hitting nearly $3 billion in 2022. The strategy didn't just work, it was a spectacular success.
And that brings us to the final and, honestly, the most shocking chapter in UMC's comeback story. A total 180-degree turn that saw the company go from a convicted criminal in the eyes of the U.S. government to one of its most critical strategic partners.
The reversal is it's stunning. Just think about this. In 2018, UMC gets indicted by the U.S. for stealing American tech to help a Chinese state-owned company. 6 years later, in 2024, that same company is partnering with the American icon Intel to build chips in Arizona to secure the U.S. supply chain against China. You couldn't make this up. It's a full-on redemption arc.
And what's so clever about this deal is that it's a win for everybody involved. UMC gets a cheap way to get back into more advanced tech and a safe home in the U.S. Intel gets a great partner to help fill its super expensive new factories, and the United States gets a stronger, more diverse supply chain. From enemy to ally. Just incredible.
But UMC's story isn't over. Their brilliant pivot into these mature chips has now attracted a massive new competitor, state-backed Chinese foundries who are flooding the market with cheap chips. And that leaves us with one last fascinating question. UMC built its incredible comeback by cleverly avoiding a fight with one giant. But can that same strategy survive a brutal all-out price war with another?